Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Testing audio levels. Check, check, check. You getting me loud and clear, nice and clean. No hums and buzzes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm going to go on stage and start the panel.
So you're just going to do a quick 30-second intro and
Yeah.
then bring you guys up on stage.
Cool.
All right, here we go.
Do we have seats? We should.
I think your mic might have been on. Do we have seats? Any seat you want to know? Chris wanted the seat on this end, on the right there, and I'm going to sit all the way on the other end to the left, and then anybody can sit in the middle. Yeah.
We will just fight.
Yeah, death match. And then you, no.
First 10 minutes. Now the panel will fight. We
Yeah.
should have 4 seats. Take one over. Yes.
Musical chairs. No. Yeah, or if you guys want to decide right now between you, like who sits where. But I know Chris wanted the seat like right here on the
Can you
end.
take the second one?
Dude, you can sit wherever you want, man. I mean, honestly.
I'm going to sit with you and hold your
Dude, we can
hands.
sit in the same chair. We can sit in the same chair.
Offer something? Sorry, this is just me as a female. I think we should like scatter the females so it doesn't look like
If you guys want to, I'm down for whatever.
On each side of
Right?
me, and I'm
Yeah.
just going to kind of
like
chill
like
out.
females
Crowd
crowd.
surf.
My wife's watching, so I want to make
Yeah, I mean, if you guys feel like that's good, I'm down for whatever. Yeah.
No. I meant
Like boy,
having,
girl,
like,
boy, girl?
no, yeah, like boy girl. Sorry.
No, I think we should put
Just
the girls
thinking
right
through
in the
because
middle.
Yeah.
diversity
Yeah,
on the panel.
Yeah.
I'd like to sit next to you.
Yeah. So should I? Let me.
You sit over here. And I'll sit
Whenever you're
over
ready, get up on stage and Roger will
All right. All right. I'm gonna go on stage. You guys ready? You guys? Are you guys feeling ready?
We're sorting out seats.
Yeah. See, yeah.
I'll sit like over. Oh yeah.
I'm gonna go on
Be
stage.
the ladies'
No,
man.
but then there'll be 3 guys over on the side.
All right. I'm gonna go.
I think you need to.
Wish me luck.
Hi.
Hi, how's it going? Welcome to day 2 of the panel discussion at MozFest. My name is Xavier Harding. Round of applause for all the folks here at Mozilla who put the show on today. So unfortunately, Desmond Patton, who you'll see in your program, is not here today. He had to cancel out, but we have a great first panel discussion about content moderation's toll. So I'd like to invite our panelists on stage right now. So panelists, if you guys would like to come on stage.
I'm not part of this.
There's a lot of discussion about who sits where, so we'll see how they sort it out, which seats. All right, nice. So I want to start off by introducing everyone here on stage. This is actually our biggest panel discussion this weekend, but I think it's going to be a good one. So first off, we have Gabby Eivin. Gabby was the creator of the Data Leaks project back when she was at Mozilla. Basically, she looked at hacked emails and found the recipes within those hacked emails and kind of made a little pseudo cookbook. I think an actual cookbook is coming out soon. Yeah. And when she's not cooking up hacked information, Gabby works in the field of human rights, working to preserve publicly available information about human rights violations. Next to her, we have Chris Gray. Chris Gray is based in Dublin. Chris was a former content moderator at Facebook, and he broke his NDA at Facebook to talk about everything that goes on inside there. He's also currently the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit against the company representing moderators who are harmed by this content moderation. So we're really glad to have you here today. Now we have Moritz and Hans. These are the directors of The Cleaners. The Cleaners is a documentary about content moderation on social media platforms. And then last but not least, we have Clara. Clara is a former CTO in the US's Department of Homeland Security, former strategic partnerships lead at Microsoft, former Google Fellow, current Mozilla Fellow, and you're also a fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the US. Is that true?
Yep.
Good, great. So yeah, we're here to talk today about the toll of content moderation. So I just kind of want to start off with some background. For anyone who wants to answer, what is content moderation? What qualifies as a content moderator online?
I mean, one of the corporate Facebook's mottos was giving everyone the power to share anything with anyone. And the question is anything true? And the answer is no, because all of these social media platforms have some specific guidelines, some community standards, what is allowed to post on Facebook or Google or YouTube or Twitter, and what is not. And the ones deciding about what to post and what not, these people are called content moderators. And most of them don't get their paychecks from Facebook, Google, Twitter themselves. They get their paychecks by outsourcing companies. And what they do, they're sitting in front of a desk 8 to 10 hours every day, and they review all of the content which is suspicious, flagged by an algorithm or by users, and they have to decide if these posts are supposed to be online or not. So this is what we researched about, and the guys are called content moderators.
And I did want to give a little bit of history to help set the context of what was just said. Historically, content moderation actually came from all of you guys here at the audience. If you remember the early days of AOL chat rooms, there were people that were volunteers that would go and help companies determine what is acceptable and what's not. And really, the definition I have is individuals that help develop and enforce policies that deem what is acceptable content and what is not. And there is actually a gradient of different professionals that work in this field. So what I just described historically has been content moderation as a volunteer industry in the early days of the internet, where this professional field did not even exist. And over time, companies started to hire individuals that came from roles from IP lawyers that were used to weighing content on the gray to set content policies, all the way to individuals that started to do spam and deal with bullying online in customer support roles that moved their way up to the top rungs of certain companies. But user-generated content has been increasing, every single year with more and more individuals online. And so a lot of major companies, they started to develop what's known today as trust and safety teams. And a lot of this work cannot be done by individuals at companies alone. And so a lot of companies, what they've done recently is they've started to outsource this work to vendors, from Cognizant to Accenture, a number of third parties that estimates say there are around 100,000 professionals that work in this field alone, some in the US and some in emerging markets in which they really deal with the worst of the internet's trash that comes from the Western world. And so that's been a lot of the discussion and framing of what is that professional ladder that people go through in this field? How do we ensure that people in this field are respected? And one of the discussions that Xavier and I had earlier is around a platform called 4chan. On 4chan, people who do this role of moderation, and they're all volunteers, they're literally called janitors. They determine what's acceptable or not on 4chan, and it's all volunteer-based, but how can we actually uplift and ensure that there are fair working conditions in this community if that is the term that we're calling them, right?
Yeah, that's really good insight. And I definitely want to get Chris's opinion in here because, could you tell us what the day-to-day is like for a content moderator?
For a censor, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, criticism of Facebook is permitted on the platform. So, and then people complain about the criticism, and I will see messages telling me that I'm a Nazi, or I'm killing free speech, I'm censoring people. So we're quite happy about that because, fine, you can say what you like. My job is actually to allow you to say that, and I can send it back and say, no, not violating. And then I click the button, and I get another one, and it's just, to be honest, most of the work is tedious. It's just people reporting each other because they're having an argument and they want to use some process to get back at the other person. It's people taking umbrage about small things or complaining about things that don't fit with their own personal morality. And a lot of the time you're just sitting there saying, for God's sake, get a life. This is fine, not a problem. You've seen in the news, right? You've seen all this, it's all terrible content and it's 8 hours a day of people butchering each other. It's not. Most of it is just, Jesus, what's wrong with these people? And then you get something horrifying and then you carry on. And then you get something funny. And the job is not as bad as they make it seem. I think the worst part is being audited. There's people checking to see if you've done your job properly. They're reviewing the same tickets and making their own decisions, applying the same rules, 20-odd thousand words of instructions that I have to keep in my head all the time when I'm looking at this content. And if their decision is very slightly different from mine, there's about 100 options to choose from. Then I've made a mistake and I'm facing getting fired if I get too many mistakes. So I think Gabby wanted to talk a little bit about that, right?
About the mistakes.
Yeah, about the mistakes.
Yeah, so I think earlier we talked about content moderators deciding what content stays on, and actually they're not deciding, they're just implementing a policy that's been decided for them. And trying to make those decisions about which content should stay online is very stressful, especially if you have a very high accuracy rate that you're having to reach. So I think the reason I'm on this panel is because the cookbook actually was a hobby, because most of the time I spend on viewing graphic content for human rights violations. So I spend a lot of my time looking at graphic videos and images. And because of that, I started to research vicarious trauma, the idea of trauma through seeing something that's traumatic. So not experiencing yourself, but experiencing it through someone else's trauma. And I started to interview people who were also viewing graphic content as part of their work. So people working in child exploitation, lawyers, journalists, and of course, content moderators. And I started to see what are the strategies, what are the best practices. And none of the strategies that I identified through talking to 60 people seem to work for content moderators. The industry of commercial content moderators, in my opinion, none of them will work. And one of the aspects of this is around feeling like you have no control. So you have these policies, you have these decisions that you're having to do, and sometimes you won't agree with them. So you might be keeping something online that you actually don't agree that it should stay there, but the policies say it should remain. Or you're taking something down that you think should stay up. So this level of lack of control is actually very harmful to you in the job that you're doing. And other professions don't have this same issue.
Yeah, you're implementing other people's standards. There was a campaign a few years ago called Free the Nipple. Did anybody remember that one? Yeah, hands up who doesn't like nipples. Yeah, but you have to take them down every time, and then people start protesting, and I'm in the middle saying, look, I just have to follow the policy, I'm sorry. One of my trainers did say to me one day, we're not actually here to take things down. We are here to look at something objectively and see if we can leave it up. We're not actually here to clean up. We're here to just keep things moving along and give people the maximum freedom. But at the same time, we do have to implement these standards and just, do what you're told.
Mm-hmm. And I think one really interesting question that you just brought up is what is acceptable content online, and how does that actually bridge into cultural contexts, right? What is considered acceptable for nipples in the Middle East might be very different from what it is in France or in certain parts of the Western world. And that is something that is really difficult in this job, is determining with local context what is considered acceptable. And the question of how companies should set these policies and who writes these policies to make sure that it is actually representative of what we deem to be socially acceptable online.
And if I may just add that, from our experience, there are actually two main challenges I would sum up. One is the psychological one, and I totally got from your explanation that you not had to screen horrible content for 8 hours a day, but we know a lot of people who did. And we cover them in our film, and they are mainly in the Philippines. And what they had to screen is, I don't want to explain what, but it was just so traumatizing to a lot of them that it would almost seem cynical for me to let it stand here as a claim that this job is not psychologically horrifying. It is.
No, it is. And I say that 90% of what you see is benign or boring, but that 10%, I was working typically 600 tickets a day. So I imagine 10% of that is 60 really awful things.
Yeah, I want you to talk more about that, because you said, you told me, backstage that 90% of this stuff is not that graphic, but then there's 10% that is. I think there's generally like a cachet, or maybe there used to be when it comes to I work at Facebook, six-figure salary, living in Silicon Valley, but this is not that, it seems like. Could you talk about that duality of, why don't they pay content moderators the same way? Why don't they get the same benefits?
€12.98 per hour. Yeah, fantastic, huh? Yeah, and and I pay taxes on that, and Dublin rent. And
between $1 and $3 at the time we researched in the Philippines for an hour.
Wow.
And that was also the reason why we focused on these people there, because actually for them it's even harder a lot of times to get the lobby or to at least get their thoughts on this work being heard. And in our film we cover people who just had to stay in the job because they were the breadwinners for their families, sometimes 6, 7 people, and their lives they financed. And they didn't get any psychological support. I mean, there was a psychologists come in every 3 months, and then the whole staff was gathered in a room like here now, and then the psychologist asked them, how do you guys feel? And they were like, now I should share my my thoughts on the job. I should share my
finger painting and yoga.
No,
We did.
no, they didn't.
Every couple of weeks, I would get an email saying,
Yeah,
"Hey guys,
see?
finger painting tonight. Come along." Great wellness team. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, nice. I mean, it's highly cynical, the whole thing, and and a lot of people just stay in the job for, let's say, 3, 4 months, and then they have to leave because otherwise they just can't cope anymore with the psychological damage they are suffering from. And then they are just left alone. There aren't any psychologists like following up with them. They're just left alone, and you never know when the trauma will join you. And
it took me a year before I realized that this job knocked me on my ass. It really did get the better of me. And a year later, I'm phoning my health insurance company to say, hey, I've discovered I have this problem. And they said, well, your cover was cancelled the day you left, and it doesn't cover mental health issues anyway. And I have a friend who is paying for counselling and medication out of her savings. She's not working. She can't go back to work at this time. And nobody cares. We're disposable. We are, back to your question, I think that what Clara was saying about how this thing has just kind of grown out of organically, this situation has evolved without any clear top-level design in the early days. And certainly in Ireland, the people that were tasked with helping you change your password, or you've locked yourself out and they need to verify your ID, they were one day asked to deal with spam, which is pretty clear is spam, just delete it. And then there was something else that's a problem. And whenever something happens, there's a whole new set of rules that Facebook creates to say, well, you can't do this on Facebook either anymore. And now it's this massive, massive set of documentation that you have to master to a 98% level of accuracy. Yeah. But you're still treated like a guy whose job is to say, yeah, this passport matches this profile picture. Mm-hmm. And you're expected to reach the same level of accuracy all the time. And you can't, because you will never make enough detailed rules to cover every eventuality and expect somebody to hold them in their head.
Mm. And that is the problem about the media, the debate we have in the media a lot of times about the problems of content moderation. And whenever Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, they're confronted with critique, it's always about their policy making. And I guess that's mainly wrong. We should mainly focus on how it's executed. And I guess already the word executing these rules is wrong, because in a lot of cases, you really freely have to interpret them. You have to take decisions based on these guidelines, but you have to take them. And it's still you have to receive what is in the image. Is this like promoting violence, or is this documenting violence? Is this a caricature? Is this like covered by the First Amendment, this kind of thing? Or is this already out of the borders like of free speech? Yeah. And this has to be done in such a speed that, as you say, it's the mistakes which are made are systemically made. That it's not a question of how the guidelines are designed, but a question of how much time is given, and in the end, how much support, how much money, how much resources are given to these people. And they get a 3 to 6 day training, in our case in the Philippines. Like they got a crash course on identifying Nazi symbols, like on a 1 2 day training base. Like they were told, okay, be careful with ovens, be careful with rats, these might be anti-Semitic. But they didn't have any clue about the context of the the hate speech of neo-Nazis in East Germany. So there are so many implications which are just made for
made
for money, for profit reasons. So we really need to question this. We need to question if it's a good idea to give our digital public to a private company, or let's say 3 private companies deciding about free speech in the online world. That is not the way it should be handled.
Yeah, I want to talk. I want to actually pass the ball to Gabby for a little bit, because we were talking a little bit about, not just Facebook, but a lot of big tech companies nowadays. For a while, they would frame themselves as kind of like, saving the world. Like, we're doing this because we're doing it for the better of humanity. But everything you hear about content moderation feels so opposite of that. I was hoping you could talk about that duality a little bit.
Yeah, so a lot of these companies, they're marketing to get new, and I don't know how it is, because I just looked at, because I live in Germany and there's 1,000 content moderators in Berlin. So I just looked at mainly at Europe and the way that they're marketing here. They use superheroes as costumes, like come be a superhero, clean up the internet, have a healthier internet. One advert in Germany for a German content moderator asked questions like, do you love social media and want to be up to date with what's happening in the world? And if you know about what actually the job entails, it doesn't include becoming a social media guru. So I think that the positioning, and then people apply and they think that they're getting these jobs, and the actual reality is horrendous. And that disconnect with what you think you're doing and actually keeping content online that you don't think should be online is extremely damaging, even before you think about what people are seeing. And for the work that I'm doing with human rights investigators, the kind of 6 buckets of strategies that are the most useful is to be able to control and know why you're doing what you're doing, to be able to be selective, to be able to identify what your triggers are, to control your physical environment that you're viewing the content in, to talk to other people, like have peer-to-peer support, and then be able to tell your managers that you're struggling. All of those 6 things I just said that are the most helpful things are completely like the opposite of what you can do in these companies. You can't tell anyone you're struggling because you're on a short-term contract. You can't be selective. You cannot have any control over your environment. So they go against it. The system needs a complete overhaul.
And I did want to add, one of the reasons why this came about is most companies, they don't really deal with the problem of terrible things happening on their platform until it's a crisis management situation, where they're suddenly having to scurry, find contractors at scale to suddenly deal with all the PR backlash that they are getting. And that's a huge struggle, not just for contractors that work for companies, but also for employees that have been at companies for 10, 15 years now that set the original content moderation policies. They're dealing with the bureaucracy of fighting for the rights of users and some of the hardest things that they see day to day, setting the right policies and pushing against the ROI of the business, pushing against advertising policy teams who are looking to help the company make money. And there are a lot of professionals today that work not only from the bottom of the ladder all the way up. If you look at 2016, there's a woman that I've talked to that currently heads up content policy at a major platform. And she has been through the rungs of this professional ladder from the ground up. But she struggles, day to day in her job, pushing against the PR team to be able to put out the right voice, to be able to ensure that things that she sees online, like the anti-vax movement, can have policies at that platform that can be enforced against. And that's the other side of the spectrum is we needed to stop having platforms deal with bad issues online in a crisis management mode and really think about the thoughtful practices on how you build a team. Right? This is a new professional sector that has evolved, come about, in which you have as sophisticated processes as diplomats online, in the offline world, making policies that impact society. I mean, we saw back in 2013, 2014, what happened in Myanmar, where companies go to new countries, they're trying to expand into a market, and do nothing in terms of moderation there, and a lot of the offline violence and whole ethnic genocide that took place years later, because there was no thoughtful planning in the types of professionalization and professionals that are needed on the ground to support how content is spread and could be maliciously spread there. And this whole entire professional sector needs to be uplifted, needs to be recognized. They should not be considered contractors. They should not be considered janitors.
Yeah, Chris, you know.
I think my sense when I was there was that there was no vision at the top. It was all just, there was, some guy wants this and somebody else wants that. And at the bottom, there's this set of rules for me, but there's no leadership. And I started asking the question, so what is the business case for content moderation? If I'm the boss of Facebook, I have a legal obligation to make money for my shareholders. How does content moderation support that goal? And I've never heard any conversation around it. There must have been a study. Do people spend more time online if we reduce and make it a nicer, kinder place? Or do they like it if it's nasty? What is good for the business? They never talk about it. So I assume that all this content moderation effort is because they have to. They're reluctant to do it. They're doing it at arm's length grudgingly because of the PR and the legislative pressure, threats of regulation, not because it's front and center to the business. So it's always going to be the lowest possible budget and the tightest controls, and these people are disposable. They're not part of the company. They're not front and center to what we do.
Yeah, Gabby, you wanted to weigh in on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't think when Mark Zuckerberg started the company, he ever wanted to think about how to deal with the things that are being posted that you're having to look at. And in 2009, I think Facebook had 12 moderators. And now I think from last year to the year before, they doubled their moderators. So they're really throwing people at this problem, which is just going to have hundreds of thousands each year of more traumatized people. So yeah, I think the lack of any kind of strategy or bringing people into this in a, and then the idea of AI, if maybe this is a good segue.
Oh, for sure, yeah, because I was asking, one question I had personally is why can't AI just handle this? Why do we have to submit people to looking at these images and things like that? But yeah, maybe you can talk about why it's not really doable.
So the focus of Mozilla right now is AI, healthy AI, and obviously there's lots of issues with AI, and those issues will just be replicated in this system. The fact is AI can't handle the level of complexity that moderation requires. It can't handle the scale. I think last year, Facebook said that 96% of nude and adult images they could detect automatically. But that still leaves, I think, 1.3 million images for moderators to look through. And that's just adult nude images. So I think that the scale makes...
It's a very simple problem relative to, compared with, if I get 500 words stream of consciousness because Doreen's boyfriend has got a new girlfriend and she's a junkie and and I have to go through, not line by line, but phrase by phrase, saying, okay, that's a violation under section 4.2.6, and that's a violation under section and after listing all of them, this is the one that I take action on because it's the highest on the... We have a hierarchy of actions. This is more important than this. Spam is more important than child abuse, for example. And I have to make the right decision based on that. And I don't see how any AI is going to do that in the near future.
Because you still, also just one, you still need humans to create the training data sets. And new images still need to be categorized all the time. So you're still going to have people to categorize the training data sets anyway, even if AI is more utilized.
Yeah, I had a question for Chris. I mean, this is just personal curiosity. Not a lot of people have broken NDA to come out against Facebook. What did you think it would be like pre-NDA broken? What do you think it would be like? And then what has it been like after you've come out?
I didn't think about it. I was annoyed. I'd had a contact from a journalist, Jen O'Connell at the Irish Times, and she just wanted to talk off the record, get some background, get some ideas, and I found myself getting really upset in the interview talking about the content, and this was the first time that I'd actually talked about that, and I kind of went away and I saw a doctor, and I broke down, and she told me I had PTSD, and I came out like, what the fuck have these people done to me? And then she called me up and said, how's it going? We'd really like to put your name on this piece. And I said, fuck yeah, let's bring it on. Yeah, because what I'd realized when I, for the first time, had this open conversation with somebody on the outside was that we are silenced by these NDAs because they don't want anybody looking at what's going on. They're avoiding any external oversight or criticism by using the law as a weapon. We're being threatened. And I had a call a couple of weeks ago from a former colleague, still at CPL, the company I was working for Facebook, and they said, hey, I hear you're being sued by Facebook. I thought, no, I have not heard a word from Facebook. Not one contact. They didn't even give a statement to the journalist who asked them to respond to what I'd said. They're they're just hoping this problem will go away. Who told you I'm being sued? Oh, my team leader. And your team leader is trying to manipulate you and threaten you and silence you. Your team leader has lied to you to obtain compliance. And what kind of way is that to treat your staff in a modern democracy? In a company that is dedicated to transparency and openness and sharing information. Privacy is dead, Mark. Yeah? This is supposed to be the world where everybody's accountable for everything, except for the companies with the power.
I think this is really important because we experienced exactly the same in the Philippines, that this is a very, very secretive industry and everybody is not allowed to talk about what they are doing because everybody signs non-disclosure agreements. And especially if you are traumatized, this is the worst which can happen, that you're not allowed to talk about your emotions, not allowed to talk about what's happening.
Can't talk to anybody.
Not talk
I've never talked to my
friends.
wife about this work.
Exactly, yes. And this is what it makes so difficult to research about that work and also for the employees to deal with that kind of work.
And whenever you hear Facebook or any of these companies talk about this, they always pretend they are transparent because they share the guidelines. Come on, a company which asks its outsourcing company in the Philippines to let their employees use a code word. And that is true. They used a code word. The first challenge we had in our research was to find out about this code word, because only by finding out the code word we could then identify the people who worked for the companies. Because they were never allowed to share with anybody, not even internally, inside the company, who they worked for. And they always had to use this code word, Honey Badger Project. This was exactly it in the Philippines at the time we were researching. Honey Badger Project was Facebook. And everybody inside the company, inside this account, knew that whenever they talked about with anybody else in the company, they had to use it in order to hide as perfectly as possible what they do there. And that is, I guess, the opposite of being transparent. They do a lot. They hire a security company just patrolling around the office rooms. They threatened us and threatened the people talking to us that in case they share anything about the company, they can be sued. They can not only lose the job, but face fees. It was really horrifying when we were there, and we really had to find a way how to make this film. And it took us so long to find a slight legal way how to, on one hand, protect the workers, the employees, and on the other hand, to make this film and to make it in a way as clear as possible.
Yeah. Claire, I think I jumped over you a couple questions before. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I did. Well, I did want to go back to what Gabby had pointed out about AI, right, and automation. And one of the biggest fears for AI is, will a workforce that usually does a lot of the manual work be automated away one day? And when do we decide to bring in contractors into the fold versus using other types of technologies and processes? And that's a lot of my research, is really looking at the tools that most professionals use today to determine acceptable content online. How do you do detection? How do you do enforcement? And how do we build it in a way that can map to the complexities of the decision-making of what is allowable speech online and what isn't, and at enormous volumes? And so, for example, for most people that have seen in the news what happened during the Christchurch shooting, live stream video content, there's a lot that we can learn from child online streaming, for pornography back in the early days that were operational practices. But there are things that are really hard to do with AI alone. And so an example with Christchurch was because the volume of content was spread at such strong speeds, it was really hard to have human moderators come in and quickly take down one by one. And so one of the operational practices Facebook did was use AI to be able to quickly take down that 17 minutes of graphic content and to be able to do it quickly at scale. But there are very different processes for how a company, for example, responds in the instance of a foreign influence operation, when there are foreign actors that come in and try to manipulate content on a platform, and users seeing from the other side their accounts being taken down for no reason. There are very complicated decision-making in which more and more technologists are developing different tools, from detecting deepfakes to other types of approaches for how we can respond to different types of content, and how we can also minimize trauma when it comes to what is at the end of the totem pole. Facebook, I think a few months ago, with all the reporting from films and from Casey Newton's piece back in March, really talking about, they started to push out some tools that can actually blur out some images that content moderators see. So there's different experiments that have been happening, but again, it's really, really hard to completely use machines as the dependent way of assessing content, because it does push against privacy, pushes against freedom of expression online.
Yeah. I want to ask a couple more questions before we kick it to the audience, because we're running low on time. But I know when you say the Honey Badger project, that's just wild to me. And I know, Gabby, you studied a lot about how other companies kind of work on moderation. Why can't the companies who maybe get it right, why can't they apply some of the same things they do there?
I haven't found any companies that can, because companies are motivated by making money. So the people I interviewed were people who worked on creating these data sets for AI, so child exploitation, people that work on child exploitation, people that work on human rights violations, journalists, lawyers, film editors. And the reason they can get it right, even though no one's really getting it right, and that's why I was working on this, is because they're able to take the time and they prioritize people, and that they're able to think about really important questions that all of this work brings. And I think that the reason that these companies are struggling is because none of the strategies will work, because none of them support quick, speedy decisions.
Yeah.
I also agree that the core problem is not technology. The core problem is that we, as different societies involved in this massive humanity project called social media, we are not yet clear about how we want to define freedom of speech, for example. Like, if you only compare the definition of freedom of speech in the US with the definition in Germany, where we come from, for example, that's completely different. Like, what do you consider to be acceptable, what not? That should be something we, as the not only users, but the members of these social media projects, should discuss about publicly. And we don't claim that it's all about, that all the fault is on the side of the companies. That's not true. The fault, we consider at least, is that they don't make it transparent, that they don't open the discussion, that they don't accept that they alone can't decide about all that. And whenever you hear Zuckerberg talking, it's like, yeah, we will follow up on that with our team, we can fix it.
So
and that's not the way it should be.
This is my thing all the time, that Facebook can do no wrong. Oh, maybe it's not perfect, but we can fix it.
Yes.
The people who are doing the work have no chain of command to turn around and say, look, this is not working. If you think in terms of startup ecosystems, there's all these disruptive people challenging the status quo, figuring out a way to change banking, for example, fintech. We're all familiar with that model now. We're seeing what's happened. You've got challengers. Within Facebook, there is a monopoly. There is one person, one department, and all the people doing what they're told. And there's an empire at the top that needs to be disrupted, needs to be challenged. But too many vested interests within the organization are preventing that from happening. Because nobody knows the solution. Nobody knows what's going to work. You have to try this and this and this and this and 100 different things and gather data and figure out what works instead of just insisting that you know what we're doing and we're just going to tweak it and we'll get it right, trust me.
Yeah, we're running on time, but my last question is about awareness for this issue. Like, how can we bring more awareness? And I also want to direct this at Chris. Like, what do you need from us on this stage and the audience? Like, what can we do to bring more awareness to this issue?
So my lawyer tells me that he has a writ prepared for the High Court in Ireland, which will go in the next few days, claiming damages for stress disorders caused by the work, the things we have to see and deal with. There are half a dozen of us in the case at the moment. There's a whole bunch more waiting in the wings, people that are afraid to even put their name on a list, that they're terrified and also traumatized, beaten down. They just don't want to talk about this anymore. And I'm here, to speak publicly and just say, look, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to just put your name on the list. It's okay to call Dave Coleman and say, how do I get justice? Whoever you are, wherever you are in the world. So, we've been talking about, it looks like people in the Philippines can bring a case in Ireland. People in Germany and Barcelona, there's a center there, they almost certainly can. We want more people to come and get behind this and get justice and take agency, take responsibility for their own lives instead of just being told what to do and told to keep their mouths shut. So if you know anybody who does this work, has done this work, is connected with people, or who has a budget to enable us to reach out and chase these people and find them and help them, I'll be the lightning rod. I'll be the one that gets shot at by Facebook if necessary. But we need more support from wider internet society.
Got it. All right. Well, with that, audience Q&A. I think we have some mics going around. So I'll let Kevin take the lead on that. Here we go.
They're here. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my questions, I have a few friends more in the Silicon Valley side who were also hired through these contracting companies to do this work, and a few of them did try to get some legal help, but they were told that because of the way this is done through these contracting setups, that you can't really get at the company which is hiring these contracting services. So I was wondering what the legal side looks like there and how this is set up with these shell companies, and if you have any sort of input on how that can be addressed. Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer, but we're under European law, not American law.
I can give this one a go. There's a class action lawsuit happening in the state of California that Selena Scola started in September 2018. And initially, she did put the third-party company and Facebook as in the claim, and now that's just been changed to Facebook. And she's added other people to the class action. And I think the issue is that in some of the contracts, there's possible arbitration agreements that are being mentioned, which is basically you can't sue us. But I think that this case is ongoing, and they're looking for more class action claimants to join them. And also, I think there is a tide happening legally around this in Australia. A media outlet called The Age has just been successfully prosecuted for negligence and duty of care around PTSD, and the claimant was awarded 180,000 Australian dollars. So I think that there is a tide. But yeah, definitely the contracts that people are signing are not helping. But I would look up Selena Scola's case.
It's worth mentioning that I came here at the invitation of Amnesty International and a new non-profit called Foxglove, who are all about holding tech companies accountable. And their view, both of these organizations, is that this is a human rights issue, and human rights law trumps employment law or insurance law, for example. So if you think you're on a building site and you're an electrician and you fall down a hole, do you sue the electrical wiring company that you're working for? Do you sue the major contractor? Do you sue the guy who left the manhole open? At the end of the day, it's the people that are operating the building site that are responsible. And I think that principle holds true with these cases as well. And that's why we think that people in the Philippines, for example, are able to join our action in Ireland.
Got it. Next question, right over here.
Thank you for this panel. I have a question. I sometimes feel like there's a disconnect between debates around ethics, AI, automation, where oftentimes human intervention is seen as not maybe the only solution, but as something that's very important. And anybody who works on, we all agree that there's certain content that has to be, unless you're completely libertarian, we know that there's certain content that has to be removed, but we also know that automating it isn't really working that well, and that risks taking down things that really shouldn't be taken down. And the only solution to this seems to be having human moderators. Based on all your experience on this, where would you draw the line? There seems to be a pay or like a cost to both either automation and the human involvement. And I find this sort of like almost a dilemma that's very, very difficult to resolve.
Yeah, and I think this is the really important point that I've been trying to drive home is we need to uplift operational practices in this space to the complexity that it reflects freedom of speech while protecting people from seeing the worst that is possible. Right now, companies don't have shared operational practices on how to deal with all types of crisis moments when it comes to terrible content landing on their platforms. Twitch, for the first time, never had to think about someone doing a live shooting, a few weeks ago, and they suddenly had to figure out an operational response. Should we take that down? Should we leave it up? How do we ensure that it's not spreading to third parties on encrypted messaging platforms, right? And how do we ensure that other platforms that are looser with their terms of service are not hosting that kind of content if illegal? And it's really, really hard. A lot of countries all around the world are thinking about regulation of content because they have no idea what to do. And they don't have any idea what they can do to ask companies to better deal with all types of threats, from foreign influence to terrorist content to disinformation. And this is a huge struggle in which if we don't start having a more transparent and shared dialogue between industry members and also the general public, it's going to be really hard. And Facebook, set up an observation board to try to bring civil society and a number of actors into the mix to show in more transparency their own decision making. But it is not very clear how transparent that is to the public, how transparent that is to governments. And so really, what needs to happen, at least from the industry side, is much more information sharing around operational practices for us to be able to have the right tools to be able to deal with all types of content at scale.
Maybe if I may add one example, which is actually based here in London. It's called Air Wars. Some of you may actually know it even. It's an organization which focuses on proving guilt in the war in Syria or in Iraq. And what they do is they try to archive videos which are uploaded to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter by citizen journalists in Syria or in Iraq, proving airstrikes or the results of airstrikes on civilian entities in Syria or in Iraq, on schools, on hospitals, and so on. And whenever these videos are uploaded, most of the time it doesn't take much time until they are taken down. For good reasons on one hand, because in a lot of cases they're really cruel. They're covering dead people. They're full of horrifying content. So it's really hard to actually claim that these videos should remain on social media. But on the other side, if we think back on what dreams we had about social media, about the emancipating effect of social media, this is maybe one of the last things remaining as a potential on social media, which we should defend, that this is also a way that when the Western media, conventional media, is not interested anymore in covering everything from the Syrian or the Iraq war, that at least civilian citizen journalists have a forum there to still reach a worldwide audience and to make their points. So why not defend the fact that these videos should remain visible, though they are completely cruel on social media? This is just to make clear how difficult it is, how to decide about these cases, and that we, actually, all of us, people from all over the world, should debate it much more, and not only like representatives at whatever board there, but all of us should debate it and what we want to use it for, what social media should be like. Should it be like first of all, a healthy environment, what Facebook always claims, where all the family can spend a lot of time and money or data? Or should it be an emancipating platform, a platform like which can help giving people a voice who normally don't have one?
And when should graphic content actually stay up, right? When it's proving out war crimes that are happening in other countries. And these are really hard debates that early content moderators had to really deal with. They might say, hey, this is really graphic, violent content that should violate all our policies, but they've started cultural movements in really helping, push against governments that were, doing very terrible things in their countries.
We're getting into moderating policy here. You're missing the point that whatever the policy is, people are going to report this stuff. Yeah, you share images. I would see pictures of what was happening in Burma. People are posting that to raise awareness, not to celebrate it. People are protesting, and it's appearing on my desk.
Yeah.
And I've got to make a call. Is that baby dead? And then I've got to press the right button. And if I press the wrong button, because my auditor thinks the baby's not dead, then I've made a mistake, and that counts towards my quality scores, and I could get fired. So I'm lying awake in bed at night, seeing that image again, and trying to formulate an argument to keep my job. And it doesn't matter what the fucking policy is. Yep. The point is, people are going to post this stuff, and people are going to complain about it. And somebody's got to look at it. Sorry, somebody else talk.
Yeah. I mean, it just really shows the complexity of policy making in this space, right?
No, but that's not what it shows. I think it shows like how difficult this job is, and how you have like 8 seconds sometimes to make this decision. And I think that in order to understand how this all works, we have to understand how these companies operate. There should be, the NDAs are there in place so that people don't game the system in order to accept, so that they don't get content past the moderators, which is what Facebook said. But it's not, it's to silence people and that we can't see what's happening. For, like Clara was saying, 100,000 people who have had this exact same experience and worse.
Yeah. Should we do one more question, or I think that's it then. So yeah, I want.
Could you clarify the name of that organization?
Air Wars.
Air Wars.
Air Wars. Okay,
I can give you a contact later if you like.
Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, I think with that, we'll wrap up the panel. Thank you so much for our panelists today. A big round of applause for everyone on stage. We're going to take a... oh, wait, one more thing?
Maybe just one follow-up. We definitely want to highlight this book by Sarah T. Roberts. She was one of the persons inspiring us a lot for making the film The Cleaners. And we also cover her in the film. It's a wonderful book. It has a lot of in-depth information about the topic. You might want to follow up on all the academic work of the people on the board here. You might even want to see our film. If you want to contact us, there is a way online. We hang around later on. Also, if you want to engage more in supporting the people in the Philippines, there is an organization called BIEN. It stands for a union, or a very small union in the Philippines, trying to defend workers' rights in the Philippines, especially in the click working industries. Bien, it's called, like the Spanish word for good. And yeah, I think all these are, or onlinecensorship.org, it's also a site some of you might know, where you can claim whenever you find it doubtful why something is taken down.
Nice. Okay, cool. Well, thank you again. We'll be back here in 45 minutes, 12:45, for the next set of panels. Thank you. Spielkamp. He's the executive director of Algorithm Watch, Affects Society. And then we have Fanny Hidvigi, European rights work. And you're also on the EU AI, next to work on AI and human rights. Member of the European Commission's High Lead Expert Group on AI, same as Fanny, yeah. So let's talk about AI. I want to start off by asking you guys.
Things, and they can do bad things, but it all depends on what kind of context and what kind of frameworks that we use them in and develop them in and design them in. So in general, it all depends on how it's built and how it's adopted. And that's how we have to think of AI as well, not as this new emergent thing that changes everything and disrupts everything, but it has to build into existing